The stench of gunpowder still hung in the air as Katherine Jones burst from the tree line, her skirts hiked up around her knees. Her lungs burned with each desperate intake of breath, and the stitch in her side felt like a hot poker against her ribs. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit had faded, but terror kept her running across the open meadow toward the silhouette of a rider on horseback. Her breath came in gasps from running. The cowboy said, "You can stop now, he can't reach you." Katherine stumbled to a halt, bending double as she tried to catch her breath. Sweat trickled down her face, and her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins. She peered up at the stranger who sat atop a magnificent palomino, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "How do you know who's after me?" she managed between gulps of air. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. "Because I've been tracking Albert Reed for 3 days now," he replied, his voice deep and steady. "Name's Xavier Mackenzie, madam." "Most folks call me Zav." Katherine straightened, wary despite his calm demeanor. It was 1875, and the Montana Territory was no place for a woman alone to trust strangers easily. "Katherine Jones," she replied, attempting to smooth her disheveled appearance. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Mackenzie, but I should be on my way." "To where exactly?" Zav asked, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. He looked to be in his late 20s with a strong jaw and shoulders broadened by years of hard work. "Reed's got men scattered throughout the county. You won't make it to the next town without running into one of them." Katherine felt her momentary courage falter. 3 days ago, she'd been a schoolteacher in Silver Creek. Now she was a fugitive running for her life. "I need to get to Whitewater Falls," she said finally. "I have a cousin there." Zav studied her for a long moment before nodding. "That's a 4-day ride from here. You won't make it on foot." He glanced back toward the forest edge. "And we shouldn't stay in the open. Reed's a persistent man." "Why are you tracking him?" Katherine asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Zav's expression darkened. "He's wanted for murder in 3 territories. I'm bringing him in." "You're a lawman, bounty hunter." He offered her the reins of his horse. "Come on. I know a place we can rest for the night. We'll figure out how to get you to Whitewater tomorrow." Katherine hesitated. Accepting help from a bounty hunter wasn't what she'd planned, but her options were limited. With a reluctant nod, she took the reins and allowed him to help her into the saddle. They rode in silence as the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. Zav led the horse on foot, scanning their surroundings with the vigilance of a man accustomed to danger. "What did you do to earn Reed's attention?" he asked eventually. Katherine stiffened. "I witnessed something I shouldn't have. He murdered the sheriff in cold blood right outside my schoolhouse. The children were inside." Her voice trembled with the memory. "I testified against him at his hearing. He escaped custody this morning." Zav glanced up at her, newfound respect in his eyes. "Brave thing to do. Foolish, perhaps," she admitted. I thought the law would protect me." "It still might," Zav said, his tone softening. "Just needs some help sometimes." As night fell, they reached a small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping. It was weathered but sturdy, with a small corral for the horse. "Old trapper's cabin," Zav explained as he helped Katherine dismount. "I've used it before. It's not much, but it's shelter." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple furnishings: a table, 2 chairs. A narrow bed occupied the single room. "You take the bed," Zav said, busying himself with lighting a fire. "I'll keep watch." Katherine sank onto one of the wooden chairs, the events of the day finally catching up with her. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Mackenzie? Surely I'm a complication to your bounty hunting." Zav paused, poker in hand. Maybe you're exactly what I need to draw Reed out." At her alarmed expression, he added quickly, "I don't mean as bait, madam, but a man like that, he doesn't let go of a grudge. He'll keep coming for you, which means he might make mistakes. And when he does, I'll be there." "That's not particularly reassuring," Katherine said dryly. A hint of a smile touched Zav's lips. No, I suppose it's not, but I give you my word I won't let any harm come to you. I'll get you to Whitewater Falls. Despite herself, Katherine believed him. There was something steady and reliable about Xavier Mackenzie, something that made her feel safer than she had since the moment she'd watched Sheriff Wilson collapse in the dust outside her schoolhouse. "Thank you," she said simply. They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Zav's saddlebags. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying her rescuer. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was character in his face lines etched by sun and wind, a small scar at the corner of his right eye, and a thoughtfulness to his expression that belied his rough appearance. "How long have you been a bounty hunter?" she asked. 5 years, Zav replied, tossing another log onto the fire. "Was a cavalry scout before that during the war. And your family," his expression closed off. "Don't have one, not anymore." Katherine recognized the pain in his voice, having lost her own parents to influenza 3 years prior. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry," Zav shrugged. "It was a long time ago." He stood and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "You should get some rest, Miss Jones. We'll leave at first light." Katherine didn't argue. Exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden. She removed her boots and outer layers but kept her dress on, too conscious of her companion to undress further. As she settled onto the narrow bed, she watched Zav take up position in a chair by the window, rifle across his knees. "What about you?" she asked. "You need to sleep too." "I'll rest later," he assured her. "I'm used to long nights." Katherine wanted to protest, but sleep was already pulling at her. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Zav's silhouette against the firelight, steady and watchful. Morning came with a pale golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Katherine woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly. Zav was no longer in the chair by the window. Panic fluttered in her chest until the cabin door opened and he stepped inside, carrying an armful of firewood. "Morning," he greeted her. "Hope you slept well." Katherine smoothed her rumpled skirts, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," he said, setting the wood beside the fireplace. "I've scouted the area. No sign of Reed or his men, but that doesn't mean they're not looking." While Zav prepared a breakfast of coffee and more hardtack, Katherine used the basin of water he'd brought in to wash her face and hands. She did her best to tidy her hair, pinning it back into a simple knot. "We'll need to make a stop in Clearwater," Zav said as they ate. "It's a small settlement about half a day's ride from here. You'll need supplies for the journey to Whitewater Falls." Katherine's face fell. I left everything behind when I fled. I don't have any money." Zav waved away her concern. "Consider it an advance on Reed's bounty." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "Besides, you'll attract less attention if you're properly outfitted." They set out as the morning mist was still rising from the valley. Katherine rode behind Zav this time, her arms reluctantly encircling his waist for balance. She tried to maintain a proper distance, but the motion of the horse kept pressing her against his back. "Mr. Mackenzie," she said after they'd been riding for an hour, "may I ask you something?" "Zav," he corrected, "and yes, you may. Why bounty hunting? Surely there are safer professions." He was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "After the war, I tried settling down, took up ranching in Texas. Had a wife, a baby on the way." His shoulders tensed beneath her hands. "Reed and his gang came through, rustling cattle. I was out checking fence lines when they hit our place, by the time I got back." Katherine tightened her grip around his waist, a wordless gesture of sympathy. "I tracked them for months," Zav continued. "Finally caught up with 2 of them in New Mexico, turned them in for the bounty, realized I had a knack for tracking and a purpose." "Reed was one of them," Katherine said, understanding dawning. "That's why you're after him." "He was the leader," Zav confirmed. "The others have been caught or killed over the years. He's the last one." The revelation cast their journey in a new light. This wasn't just about getting her to safety or even about collecting a bounty. For Xav, this was personal, the culmination of a quest for justice that had consumed years of his life. "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly, "for what he took from you." Xav didn't respond, but his hand briefly covered hers where it rested against his stomach. They reached Clearwater just after noon. It was little more than a wide spot in the trail, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of cabins clustered around a dusty main street. "Wait here," Xav instructed, helping Katherine dismount in front of the general store. "I need to ask around, see if anyone's seen Reed or his men." While Xav spoke with the blacksmith, Katherine entered the store. The shopkeeper, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted her with polite curiosity. "Passing through?" he asked as she examined a rack of ready-made dresses. "Yes, on my way to visit family," Katherine replied with the story she and Xav had agreed upon. "Traveling with your husband." The shopkeeper nodded toward the window, where Xav could be seen in conversation with several men. Katherine hesitated. "Yes," she said finally, the lie feeling strange on her lips. "My husband." When Xav joined her a few minutes later, she had selected a serviceable brown traveling dress, a shawl, and other necessities for the journey. "Find anything useful?" she asked quietly as he paid for her selections. "Reed passed through yesterday," Xav confirmed, his voice equally low, "with two men. They were asking questions about a woman fitting your description." Fear coiled in Katherine's stomach. "Then they know I'm headed for Whitewater Falls." "Maybe. But they were heading south out of town. Might be a false trail, or they might have information we don't." Xav gathered their purchases. "Either way, we're not staying. There's a back way out of town that leads to the river trail, less traveled." They departed Clearwater by the route Xav had described, a narrow track that wound through pine forest before descending toward a swift-flowing river. Katherine, now wearing her new dress, felt marginally more prepared for what lay ahead. As they rode, she found herself increasingly aware of Xav, the breadth of his shoulders, the easy way he sat a horse, the occasional sidelong glances he cast in her direction. It was disconcerting to realize that despite the danger of their situation, or perhaps because of it, she was developing an attachment to this quiet, determined man. "Tell me about your cousin in Whitewater Falls," Xav said as they made camp that evening beside the river. Katherine busied herself with spreading her bedroll near the fire he'd built. "Eleanor is my mother's cousin, actually. I've never met her, but we've corresponded for years. After my parents died, she invited me to come live with her, but I had my teaching position in Silver Creek." She smiled ruefully. "I should have taken her up on the offer. You couldn't have known what would happen," Xav pointed out. "No, but I might have been spared watching a man die in front of my schoolhouse." Katherine shuddered at the memory. "Sheriff Wilson was kind to me when I first came to town. He didn't deserve such an end." Xav studied her across the fire. "Few people get the ending they deserve, good or bad. That's why I do what I do, try to tip the scales a little." "And when you catch Reed, what then?" Katherine asked. "Will your quest be over?" Something vulnerable flickered across Xav's face. "I've been chasing him so long, I'm not sure I know how to do anything else anymore." "You could go back to ranching," Katherine suggested, "or find some other way to use your skills." "Maybe." Xav didn't sound convinced. "What about you? After this is over," Katherine stared into the flames. "I can't go back to Silver Creek. Too many people there know about my testimony. Even if Reed is caught, his associates might." "You could stay in Whitewater Falls," Xav said. "Start fresh." Towns are always in need of good teachers. The thought had crossed Katherine's mind, but hearing Xav say it made the possibility seem more real. "Yes, I suppose I could." They fell silent, each lost in contemplation of futures that suddenly seemed uncertain. Katherine wondered if their paths would ever cross again after they reached Whitewater Falls, and was surprised by how much the thought of parting from Xav troubled her. The night passed uneventfully, but dawn brought a cold, steady rain that soaked through their clothes and made the trail treacherous. They pressed on nevertheless, Xav leading the horse carefully along the slippery riverbank. By midday, the rain had stopped, but dark clouds still hung low over the mountains. They paused to rest the horse and eat a quick meal of jerky and the last of their hardtack. "How much further to Whitewater Falls?" Katherine asked, wringing water from her shawl. "2 more days if the weather holds," Xav replied, scanning the sky with concern. "But this rain might slow us down." They had just remounted and started along the trail when a shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree beside them. Xav reacted instantly, pulling Katherine from the saddle and down behind a fallen log as 2 more shots whistled overhead. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. Katherine pressed herself against the damp earth, heart hammering in her chest. Xav fired twice in the direction of their attackers, then crouched beside her. "2 men on the ridge," he said grimly. "They've got the high ground. Reed's men," Katherine whispered. "Most likely." Xav peered over the log, then ducked as another shot rang out. The horse bolted. "We'll have to make a run for it on foot." Katherine looked at the dense forest stretching behind them. "Into the woods, it's our best chance. They'll have to come down from the ridge to follow, and that'll slow them down." Xav's eyes met hers. "When I give the signal, run as hard as you can." "Don't stop, don't look back, I'll be right behind you." Katherine nodded, gathering her skirts in preparation. Xav fired 3 quick shots toward the ridge, then shouted, "Now!" She ran. Branches whipped at her face and thorns tore at her dress, but terror drove her forward. Behind her, she could hear more gunshots, then the crashing sounds of pursuit. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. When she finally stumbled into a small clearing, she realized Xav was no longer behind her. Panic seized her. Had he been shot, captured? With her heart in her throat, she turned back toward the sounds of pursuit. That was when a hand clamped over her mouth, and she was pulled behind a massive oak tree. She struggled until Xav's voice whispered in her ear, "It's me, be still." Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived as voices called to each other in the distance. Reed's men were still following. "This way," Xav murmured, taking her hand and leading her through a nearly invisible game trail. They moved as quickly and quietly as possible, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. The forest grew denser, the terrain more rugged as they ascended a steep slope. Katherine's dress caught on brambles, and her boots slipped on moss-covered rocks. But Xav's firm grip kept her moving forward. When they finally stopped, they were on a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the valley below. There was no sign of Reed's men, but the darkening sky promised more rain. "We need to find shelter before that storm hits," Xav said, still holding her hand. Katherine became acutely aware of his touch and gently withdrew her fingers, though part of her longed to maintain the connection. "What about your horse and our supplies?" "Gone," Xav admitted. "But we're alive, which is what matters, and I know these mountains. There's a line shack about 2 miles from here that trappers use. We can hole up there until morning." As if on cue, thunder rumbled across the valley and fat raindrops began to fall. They set off again, moving at a brisk pace through the gathering storm. The line shack proved to be little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small fireplace and a single cot. It smelled of damp earth and old smoke, but it was dry and relatively secure. Xav immediately set about building a fire while Katherine wrung water from her hair and dress. Both were soaked to the skin, and as the temperature dropped with the coming night, Katherine began to shiver uncontrollably. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Xav said, concern evident in his voice. "Here." He rummaged in a storage trunk and produced a threadbare blanket. "It's not much, but it's dry. I'll step outside while you change." "No," Katherine said quickly, imagining him standing in the rain. "Just turn around, please." Xav obliged, facing the wall while Katherine peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments with trembling fingers. She wrapped the rough blanket around herself, securing it as best she could. "I'm decent," she announced, though she felt anything but in her makeshift attire. Xav turned, his eyes widening slightly before he quickly averted his gaze. I'll hang your clothes by the fire to dry. What about you? Katherine asked, noting how his shirt clung to his broad shoulders. You're just as wet as I was. A flush crept up Xav's neck. I'll manage. Don't be ridiculous, Katherine said, summoning her most authoritative schoolteacher voice. You'll catch your death. There's another blanket there, isn't there? After a moment's hesitation, Xav nodded and retrieved a second blanket from the trunk. With his back to her once more, he removed his shirt and trousers, wrapping the blanket around his waist before turning back. Katherine tried not to stare at his bare chest, muscled and scarred from years of hard living. A particularly jagged scar ran across his left shoulder, disappearing beneath the blanket. A patchy arrow, Xav explained, catching her gaze. 6 years ago. You've lived a dangerous life, Mr. Mackenzie, Katherine said softly. Xav, he corrected again, arranging their clothes on a makeshift line near the fire. And yes, I suppose I have. They sat side by side on the cot, sharing its narrow width out of necessity. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the small window and thunder rolling across the mountains. Inside, the fire cast a warm glow over their temporary sanctuary. You think they're still searching for us? Katherine asked. Not in this weather, Xav replied. They'll hunker down somewhere, same as us, but they'll be back on our trail at first light. Katherine drew her knees up to her chest, clutching the blanket more tightly around her. I'm sorry for bringing this trouble on you. You didn't bring it, Xav said firmly. Reed did, and I was already hunting him, remember? Still, you could have handed me over to the law in Clearwater, let them deal with me while you continued your pursuit. Xav's expression softened. Is that what you think I should have done? No, Katherine admitted. I'm grateful for your help, I don't want to be the reason you don't catch him. You won't be, Xav assured her. In fact, I'm counting on Reed's obsession with silencing you to lead him right to us. Katherine shivered, but not from cold. That's not especially comforting. Sorry. Xav's hand found hers in the dim light. I don't mean to frighten you, but I need you to understand I won't let anything happen to you, no matter what. The intensity in his gray eyes made Katherine's breath catch. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his skin against hers, of how in this moment they were utterly alone together, miles from civilization. Why? She whispered. Why risk yourself for me? Xav's gaze dropped to their joined hands. Because you stood up against evil when it would have been easier to stay silent, because you're brave and principled and... He faltered, then met her eyes again. And because in just these few days, you've reminded me that there might be something worth living for beyond vengeance. Katherine's heart thundered in her chest. It was improper, impossible, irrational, and yet she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them, forged in danger and desperation. Xav, she said, his name feeling intimate on her lips. A gunshot shattered the night, followed by a man's voice calling through the storm. We know you're in there, Mackenzie. Send out the woman, and maybe we'll let you live. Xav was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his gun from its holster and moving to the window. Katherine clutched the blanket around her, terror gripping her anew. Reed, she whispered. Xav shook his head. His men, 2 of them, same as before. He peered through a gap in the shutters. They're using the trees for cover. Another shot splintered the wooden door. Last chance, Mackenzie. The voice called, The woman for your life. There's a back window, Xav said, turning to Katherine. Small, but you can fit through it. Head northeast through the trees. There's a stream about half a mile that way. Follow it downstream and it'll lead you to a trading post by morning. I'm not leaving you, Katherine protested. Yes, you are. Xav's expression was resolute. This is what I do, Katherine. Let me do it. Before she could argue further, Xav had moved to the back of the cabin and was working to loosen the shutters on a small window. Outside, the men called again, their patience clearly wearing thin. Take these, Xav said, pressing his spare revolver into her hands along with a small pouch. Money for the stage from the trading post to Whitewater Falls. Xav, please, Katherine begged. Come with me. For answer, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her a brief, fierce press of lips that left her breathless. Go, he whispered against her mouth. "Live, that's how you can help me." With tears blurring her vision, Katherine allowed him to help her through the window, blanket clutched around her body. The rain soaked her immediately, but she hardly noticed. "Northeast," Xav reminded her. "To the stream, don't stop." And then he was gone, back inside the cabin. Moments later, gunfire erupted, and Katherine found herself running once more away from the man who had risked everything to protect her. She ran blindly through the darkness, rain lashing her face, branches tearing at her bare legs beneath the blanket. Behind her, the gunfire continued, punctuated by shouts and then, horrifyingly, silence. The stream, when she found it, was swollen with rainwater, rushing noisily over rocks. Katherine followed it downstream as Xav had instructed, moving as quickly as she dared in the darkness. Her mind replayed their brief kiss, the determination in his eyes, the finality of his goodbye. Dawn broke gray and miserable, the rain reduced to a steady drizzle. Katherine was exhausted, cold, and nearly hopeless when she spotted smoke rising through the trees ahead. The trading post Xav had mentioned came into view, a sturdy log building with a corral and stable beside it. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing, suddenly conscious of her appearance barefoot, wrapped in nothing but a blanket, hair a tangled mess. But she had nowhere else to go. The trading post's owner, a grizzled old frontiersman named Jebediah, asked few questions when she stumbled through his door. He provided clothes borrowed from his wife, gone to visit her sister in Bozeman, and hot food that Katherine ate mechanically, too numb with grief and exhaustion to taste. "Stage to Whitewater Falls comes through tomorrow morning," Jebediah told her. "You can sleep in the back room tonight." Katherine nodded her thanks, but as she moved toward the offered sanctuary, the trading post door burst open. She whirled, expecting Reed's men, ready to fight or flee, but it was Xav who stood in the doorway, soaked and bloody but gloriously alive. "Katherine," he breathed, relief washing over his battered face. She flew across the room and into his arms without a thought for propriety, sobbing against his chest. His arms closed around her, holding her tightly. "I thought you were dead," she wept. "I thought they killed you." "Takes more than that to kill me," Xav murmured into her hair. "I'm sorry I scared you." Jebediah discreetly retreated to another room, leaving them alone in their reunion. When Katherine finally pulled back, she saw that Xav had a makeshift bandage around his upper arm, stained with blood. "You're hurt," she said, gently touching the bandage. "Just a graze," he assured her. "Reed's men weren't expecting me to come out shooting. One's dead, the other ran." "And Raid, still out there," Xav admitted, "but his men will have reported back by now. He knows we're headed for Whitewater Falls. He'll be waiting." Katherine's newfound joy dimmed. "Then I can't go there. I can't risk bringing danger to my cousin's door." "You'll go," Xav said firmly. "But not alone." Hope fluttered in Katherine's chest. "You'll come with me all the way," Xav promised, "and after Reed is dealt with, if you wanted." "I could stay." The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Katherine searched his face, finding vulnerability beneath his usual stoic expression. "What about bounty hunting?" she asked softly. "I told you," Xav said, taking her hands in his. "You've reminded me there's more to life than vengeance. If you'll have me, Katherine, I'd like to find out what that might be. With you?" Katherine knew it was fast, perhaps even foolish. They'd known each other less than a week. Yet in that time, they'd faced death together, protected each other, seen each other at their most vulnerable. And somewhere along the way, amidst the danger and desperation, something precious had taken root. "I'll have you," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. 3 days later, they arrived in Whitewater Falls. Katherine's cousin Alina welcomed them with open arms, asking few questions about the nature of their relationship or the trouble that followed them. Reed came for them the next day, as they'd expected. But the sheriff of Whitewater Falls had been warned, and when Reed made his move, he found himself surrounded by lawmen with Xav at their head. "This ends now," Xav told him, gun steady in his hand as Reed was forced to his knees in the dusty street. Reed spat at Xav's feet. You've been chasing me for years, Mackenzie, all because of a woman who wasn't smart enough to run when she heard riders coming. Katherine, watching from the boardwalk, saw Xav's hand tighten on his gun. For a terrible moment, she thought he might shoot Reed where he knelt. Instead, Xav holstered his weapon. "My wife died because of you," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "But I'm not going to die because of you. You're going to hang, Reed, and I'm going to live." As Reed was led away in chains, Xav turned to Katherine. She went to him without hesitation, taking his hands in hers. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Xav looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "For the first time in 5 years," he said, "I think I might be." 6 months later, they were married in the small church in Whitewater Falls. Katherine wore a gown of ivory silk, and Xav wore a new suit that made him look somewhat uncomfortable but undeniably handsome. Eleanor wept with joy, and the entire town turned out to celebrate. With Reed's bounty and Katherine's savings from her teaching position, they purchased a small ranch outside of town. It wasn't grand, but it had good water and fertile soil, and most importantly, it was theirs. Katherine took up teaching at the town school, while Xav worked the land, slowly building a herd of cattle and a reputation as a fair businessman. At night, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the Montana sky, talking about their days and their dreams for the future. One evening, a year after their wedding, Katherine joined Xav on the porch with a special piece of news. "I visited Dr. Morgan today," she said, settling beside him on the swing he'd built that spring. Xav looked up from the bridle he was mending, concern crossing his features. "Are you ill?" "No." Katherine took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The bridle fell forgotten to the porch floor as Xav gathered her into his arms, joy and wonder transforming his face. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." "Our future," Katherine corrected, resting her forehead against his. As the sun slipped behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had begun in terror and desperation, with her breath coming in gasps from running and a stranger's reassurance that she was safe. It had led through danger and loss, courage and sacrifice. And now, in this quiet moment of perfect joy, she knew that the cowboy who had once saved her life had also given her something far more precious. A love that had survived the worst the world could throw at them and emerged stronger for it. In the end, they had both stopped running from danger, from the past, from the possibility of loving again. And in standing their ground together, they had found a happiness neither had dared to imagine.